Welcome to the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom. Novels like Catch-22 focus the reader in a fully formed military universe of absurdity, cynicism, desperation, and sometimes, when it seems most out of place, heroic deeds. The book, Never a Good War, that we will discuss shortly, has some similarities to Catch-22, but tells the stories of American soldiers in the last year of the Vietnam War. These soldiers were striving for survival, not victory, yet they were dealing with constant threats and terrifying lethal violence. Such small dramas were the reality of Vietnam at the end, as troops struggled from day to day until they finally could go home. Never a Good War was written by Winston, who served in the Vietnam War and was a longtime reporter and editor with the Wall Street Journal. Nice to have you here, Winston, to discuss your book. This is your first novel, and it's received many 5-star reviews on Amazon.com. I'm curious, Winston, after all this time, why write a book about the Vietnam War now?
This year marks the 40th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, which raises questions about what was it like at the end. I'd not seen a book that treated the end of the war. Others focused on why we got in, how it was. The dynamic at the end of the war was a lot different. Vietnam wasn't a war where we invaded, fought battle to battle until the end and went home. You went over there and you served a one-year tour. And in so doing, you really focused on what am I going to do to make it through the year and get out of here.
Right.
That made for interesting stories that I think have been largely overlooked and that those of us who were there live with to this day.
And of course, you were there. And what was your job when you were there?
I was a medic. I had been drafted at the end of the war. As you mentioned, I was with a newspaper, and which is how I ended up getting drafted. I was in college on the school newspaper at University of Virginia, and we did not have a journalism program. I was offered a summer job with a newspaper here in Washington, and I thought, well, I'll give it a chance. And if I didn't like it, then I'd study medicine or business or law or something like that. And the job was so good, I decided to take the year off and really give it a shot. So I turned in my papers, and they said, well, you know, you've got a high draft lottery number, you'll probably be pretty good. And I crossed my fingers, and that was the case, which in fact it wasn't.
Oh dear.
3.5 weeks after I turned in my papers, I got my draft notice.
Now, what year was this? This was
1970.
Okay. And then what kind of training did you have then?
You go through basic training. You learn which end of a rifle is which. You learn how to march and not step on your own feet. Then they give you individual training. And they sent me to medic school down at Fort Sam Houston, Texas.
Okay.
Which was an excellent program. A lot of the guys, when they got out of the service, were recruited as physician's assistants, some invited to apply to medical school. It was advanced first aid, minor surgery, emergency training, that kind of thing.
But had you requested that kind of service? I mean, you had not had a medical background at all, though, right?
No.
So
I think the fact that I had some college, thought that I'd be able to read the textbooks better than some other people, and that's what they decided they wanted me to do. Plus, my eyes were terrible. I couldn't shoot. I couldn't hit the target if I had to.
My goodness. Well, you know, your book is fiction, but it is based on actual events, and details in the book read like they came from personal experience. I mean, what do you think? What did you think about Vietnam when you were there? Were you opposed to being in the war, or did you feel like this was something you should be doing? Well,
you know, when you're thrown into the middle of a boiling kettle of water, you just want to get out. I had no real strong opinions going in. No.
Okay, you thought it was your duty to...
No, I didn't think it was my duty either.
Okay.
But it was what I got drafted, and I figured, well, that's the way it goes. My family, my father was a bomber pilot, World War II. His brothers were all in the service. My grandmother was a major in the Red Cross. She loved the fact that she outranked all of her sons. They took World War II very seriously.
Yes, yes.
But when they came back, they never talked about it.
Okay.
And so when I got drafted, my father simply said, well, your number's up.
Yes, right. It's your time to serve.
It's your time to go.
Okay.
And that was how it
happened.
Right.
Okay. Now, well, what did you learn when you were there? Did you have any thing that you feel that you came home with that it changed you dramatically?
You mean, did I have an epiphany by
Yes.
my experience over there? Not really. It was a lot of experience, which I guess is the reason for the book. Tell the story, make up the stories.
Okay.
I mean, this is the Vietnam War. I don't think it's putting too fine a point on it, but really was a defining event of the 1960s and 70s.
It was. It was.
And 2.7 million Americans served in it. 58,200 died.
Yes, huge amount.
And everybody had their own stories. Everyone's experience was different.
Yes, yes.
And so my experience was different.
Well, do you think that war brings out the best and worst in men?
That's a tough question. Again, everybody's different. A lot of people would just keep their head down. Some people would try to take advantage of the situation for personal gain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a episode in the book about the sergeant who was smuggling jade.
Yes.
I mean, that sort of thing went on.
Sure.
I mean, is that good or bad? Put a moral stamp on it, your own. He was taking advantage of a situation.
Right, right.
Some people see an opportunity to do things for other people. We call them heroes, whatever.
It depends on the person, I guess. Well, do you see veterans from the Vietnam War now with major problems?
No. I knew a couple of the guys who were involved in building the Vietnam Memorial.
Mm-hmm.
That became a real crusade for them.
Okay.
Some people would think they had an obsession with it. One guy got divorced as a result of it. I'm sure there are people who came back and were never the same.
Yes.
You read about them. I didn't know anybody like that.
Okay, it wasn't. Well, I read that Vietnam War veterans had an astronomical suicide rate. Do you think that this fact was underreported?
I don't know if that's true or not. There's a lot of urban legends with regard to
that rate,
to the war
Okay.
in general.
Mm-hmm.
That draftees were thrown into the thick of things
Mm-hmm.
and unprepared and killed at higher levels. In fact, they weren't.
Okay.
The fact that blacks were disproportionately
Drafted over
drafted
over
and
whites.
killed in the war, that's not true.
Okay.
Statistically, people that served in the war were largely representative of the country as a whole.
Okay.
And their experiences after the war probably reflect the general population too. And you got to remember, these were the 60s and the 70s.
That's right.
If you were inclined to go off the deep end, you could have done it at Berkeley. You didn't have to go to Da Nang.
That's right. That's right. There are a lot of drugs. Well, what did you think about that AP photo by Nick Oot of that young, naked 9-year-old Vietnamese girl running as her back is burning from the napalm that the planes dropped on her village? I mean, didn't that photo change America's position about the war?
That was one of them. There's a famous photo of the Vietnamese police commander shooting a Viet Cong prisoner with his hands tied behind his back in the head. There are also the pictures of the end of the war, of the poor Vietnamese hanging onto the skids of the helicopter to try to get out of there. The same kind of pictures could be taken in any war. It was not to downplay that or disrespect the situation. It was a horrible, but it was a snapshot in time. Same thing probably was going on elsewhere. Same thing with acts of kindness going on somewhere.
Okay, so it wasn't just one photo that changed people's position. It was just a series of different.
Certainly,
Yeah.
I can't speak for people
Yes.
at large, but a graphic image like that does have an effect on people at the time. I mean, you want to take the opposite picture perspective. The photo of the guys raising the flag on Mount Suribachi during World War II.
Right.
That probably changed a lot of people's lives.
Exactly. That's a good point. Well, I liked your description in the first chapter of your book. You call it the hottest place on earth. Can you give our viewers some description of how hot Vietnam felt when you were there?
It's the contrast is what gets you.
The contrast, okay.
You get off an air-conditioned airplane, so you're walking into a convection oven. It's 90, 95 degrees with 85% humidity.
Right.
Everybody there is used to it. You're not.
And you're just perspiring like crazy.
Right. It takes a long time to get used to it, even if you get even if you can get used to it. I got an email from somebody that got the book, and he said that vividly brought back his experience right off the
Of
plane.
how hot you felt. Yeah.
He said that he got off the plane. It was New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1970. 71, sorry, 1971. He got off the plane, was hit in the face with this hot towel. He went to his barracks. He thought it might be air conditioned. It wasn't. There was a big fan blowing hot air through the thing. Then he was invited to a New Year's Eve party. He changed, went to the officers' club. It was just as hot as it was inside as outside, maybe even hotter. And the band was playing, "We Gotta Get Out of This Place."
That's right.
and he thought, what have I gotten myself into?
This is exactly right. And then you also wrote in the first chapter that everyone was green. I mean, the uniforms, the boots, the ambulance, the men, the underwear, the socks, everything was green.
Right.
Was that because of camouflage, or was that?
Yeah, it probably was.
Well,
Now, and today, it's funny that sticks out for you, because today you see people in Iraq, Afghanistan, they're all in the sand-colored camis.
Right.
And somebody also commented on the book, said, green, I thought that they wore camouflage sand-colored uniforms.
Right.
And I said, no, that's this war.
That's this war, that's right.
Our war, we all blended in with the trees.
The trees, that's right. Well, your book seems organized like a collection of related short stories rather than a sustained narrative novel. Why did you take that approach?
Well, life's like that. And I don't think of them so much as short stories as episodes.
Okay, episodes.
And the connecting theme is time. Mm-hmm. You get there, you go through a bunch of adventures.
And you're waiting to leave,
Then
right?
you leave, right. And in that period, different things happen to you. Surrounded or connected with other people, different things happen to them.
Okay.
And that really was the way it was. But for a reader, I think it's easy for them to pick up and put down and then think, well, what happens next? Pick it up again, put it down.
Right.
There's a rap on readers today that they don't have the attention spans to sit down and read War and Peace or Madame Bovary.
Exactly.
And that's probably true, because everybody's 17 seconds on their smartphone.
That's right.
But this approach tells an episodic story in small bites that I think people can relate to.
They can digest it easily. Yeah.
Right.
Well, did you keep a journal when you were in Vietnam?
No, I didn't. From time to time, I would write letters to my parents, my grandmother, but that was it.
And then after you came back, did you write about your experiences in Vietnam, like in articles or anything? Did you?
No.
You didn't?
Nope.
So
I jumped right back into the real world.
Okay.
I remember, I had left college. I went back to college, and the last thing I wanted to do was sit around and stew about the war when I still had 2 years of school to do, a lot of beer to catch up drinking, and then get on with the career.
That's right. That's right. Well, I thought the description of your character Harry was a hard one for me to read, because Harry went the wrong way in the dark and tripped over one of our landmines. I mean, can you briefly describe that scene?
Well, when you are out on patrol at night, you make a little camp, and then around the camp, and then there would be guards posted behind trees, and they would be responsible for keeping watch, and then 4 hours later somebody would come and relieve them.
Okay.
And then around the guard perimeter there would be booby traps. And in this instance, this character woke up, still groggy, went to relieve the guy behind a tree, took the wrong path, and tripped a landmine.
And of course, how devastating, right? I mean, these injuries and these things that happen to soldiers, it's so...
Non-combat casualties were relatively high. Helicopter crashes, things like this, automobile accidents. And this was considered combat related, but not a combat casualty.
Okay.
And And as far as paperwork goes, that would have been a combat related, but not a actual through hostile actions, and that happened.
And did it happen when you were there? Did you see that happen to someone?
Yes.
Ugh, it must have killed you, did it? Did you feel terrible?
Yes.
The battalion's motto, "Death is our business and business is good." Did you see that motto when you were in Vietnam?
Yes. They all the units went overboard trying to come up with catchy things like that, and they painted them on everything: the jeeps, trucks, the barracks. That I think was the best of the ones I saw.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just whew. On page 191, you wrote that he, quote, he hadn't learned the secret of getting ahead in the Army wasn't winning battles or doing your job well. Instead, it was doing everything you could to make your immediate superior look good. I mean, did you see that happening a lot in the Army?
With no disrespect to our military establishment, it's a bureaucracy just like everything else.
Okay.
And you can do your job very well and be overlooked, but if you don't make the people you work for happy, you're not going to be happy.
And you're not going to get ahead, right?
Right.
Okay.
And there is a lot of that. I saw a lot of that in the Army, and I'm sure it still goes on today.
Yes.
There's a lot of favoritism. People officers serve together. They look out for each other. But yeah, it's a bureaucracy, and that's the way bureaucracies work.
That's right, that's right. And then you wrote in your novel, when the U.S. turned the heavy fighting over to the South Vietnamese, whether they were ready or not, things went south for Americans and stationed there. Can you give some examples of how things went south?
This is at a time when people are actually coming home.
Okay.
And there's a lot of turnover in the units. As a result, they don't function smoothly. And that can create problems.
Were you low on supplies?
And then at the same time, they were handing over a lot of equipment to the Vietnamese army. So there was a lack because of that. Some of the stuff didn't work very well. And truth be told, there was a lot of pilfering going on.
Stealing.
Yes. This was an urban legend. I don't know if it's true or not, but it had the foundation, in fact, that when the United States Army turned over a big base in a place called Plaisirang to the 4th ARVN Infantry Division with a big ceremony, generals saluted, turned everything over, there was a review, they left. 4th ARVN took this place over, and it was going to be their base to pacify and control this huge area in the Central Highlands. Story goes that a month later, Army IG Inspector General sent a team out to Plaisirang to see how everything was going. And when they got there, everything was missing.
Everything was missing.
That the buildings had been taken apart and sold for scrap. That all they found was concrete pads where the buildings were. Now, I'm sure that didn't happen, but that was the impression everybody got at the end, is that they were taking care of themselves.
Everyone was taking care of themselves,
or
right.
somebody was, and that
there would not be any repercussions.
No, of course not. It was chaos.
It was chaos. And you also wrote in your novel that when the Marines were given enough chemicals to kill everyone in Cleveland, everything in the jungle grew back in less than 2 years. I mean, you'd think you're using all these heavy-duty chemicals, you wouldn't have this stuff growing back.
That's a reference to the use of Agent Orange.
Agent Orange.
The dioxin, which was heavily used in 69, 70 to defoliate areas that were believed to be hiding places for the enemy.
Right.
And they were not cheap in its application. And it would kill the vegetation, it would kill the trees, but it would just kill what was there. It wouldn't inhibit what would grow back.
Okay.
And there were areas I was in that were heavily thicket with dead trees that had been killed by the Agent Orange, that were on their side, crisscrossed over each other, that made it very difficult to walk around in.
Well, I can imagine. And then
they stopped. Then they stopped
Using
the
it.
application of it. But the stuff lingers to this day.
Yes.
And the United States government is spending millions to help the Vietnamese clean up hotspots that they've identified, mostly at Air Force bases, where it was stored before they put it on the planes. And they would spray it like crop dusting, right?
Right.
And so there would be piles and canisters of it at the Da Nang Air Force Base, at Tan Son Nhut Air Force
Very
Base, the other
toxic,
spots.
yeah.
And it would, and then when we left, we're not putting the canisters back on a plane. It's sitting there. And so I know in particular Da Nang, the Da Nang Air Base is a dioxin hotspot, and a couple million a year is spent on remediation of it. And then the lingering environmental effects.
Exactly.
With some
And health
yeah,
issues.
connection to fetal
Terrible,
problems.
terrible. Well, did you learn any Vietnamese when you were there?
TT.
TT? What does
That
that mean?
means very little.
Very little. And have you returned to the country as a tourist?
No, I haven't. I have a good friend at the Wall Street Journal who also was a medic, David Rogers, who I dedicate the book to. He's a fabulous guy. He's a very good medic. He's the best reporter I ever knew in Washington. He now works for Politico. He did go back for the Journal and wrote a very touching article about the town he operated out of, and that the kicker of the story was the biggest change. The people were very friendly. He met somebody that had been a South Vietnamese soldier they had worked with. He was an old man now living in a house. They reconnected. And he said, but as far as the general population goes, the biggest change since he'd been there in 1969 was everybody had an icebox.
And
They
you
had
mean
a refrigerator, yes.
They call it icebox.
Yeah, everybody had a refrigerator, and that the civilization had finally come to this little town.
Okay, so did they have paved roads? And
No.
No.
But they had electricity, and so
Okay.
as a result, they
Okay.
had refrigerators.
Well, what are your favorite books about war? I mean, what books did you, when you were in college, and what books did you really like that inspired you to write a book about war?
When I was a little boy, I went on a trip with my grandmother, and we were overseas, and we were having a great time, but I couldn't understand a word anybody was saying. And so we would go to newsstands, and I would buy American newspapers,
Right.
particularly the International Herald Tribune.
Yeah, which
And
is
I
great-
just
great paper.
devoured them. Even though the baseball scores were 3 days old, I would sit there. And so I love to read, and books in general gave me the background and interest to tell a story. Now, as far as war stories, Catch-22 is terrific. Red Badge of Courage is terrific. All Quiet on the Western Front, World War I book.
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great one.
Because, you know, war isn't all guts and glory. War is a person trying to put up with an immediate circumstances from day to day.
Well, this is it. I love the end of your book. There's a lot of drama not knowing whether these poor soldiers are going to be able to get home. In other words, it's sort of the feeling of, well, as you're reading about them, you're thinking, I hope to God they get out, because everyone's counting on leaving, but things can happen.
Yes, and you talk about photos. This is a very common picture. You can look on the internet. People, he had the helmet, hard army helmet, and then upon this was a cloth cover. And that when you got close to leaving, usually 2 months, they would draw a calendar on the cover of the helmet.
They would. Oh.
And then they would mark off days, X them off. And then you would see a guy with maybe 1 week left. And the officers, in their wisdom, knew, I'm not going to give that guy a dangerous job. He's got a week left. I can see it right there on his helmet.
Oh, that is so good, though, isn't it?
And so, it's very, they call it DEROS, date estimated return from overseas. Everything's an acronym in the military. It was very crucial. I mean, you're there for a year. You knew the day you were supposed to go home, that you look forward to that day. And then with regard to the book, in spring of 1972, the North Vietnamese did in fact launch this huge military operation
yes.
called the Easter Offensive. And it was like nothing in the war. They actually came out and fought a World War II-like battle out in the open. No guerrillas, no jungle.
Okay.
It's tanks and planes and everything. And if you were about to leave and this hell was breaking loose, you were convinced, oh, I'm going to stick around. I got to stay here. I'm not going to get out of here. So that was the tension. I thought it was a good way to build that up. And it actually it happened. It was
a page turn. You thought, well, are they going to be able to get out? Are they going to be able to leave? They were all so excited about leaving.
I think anxious is a better word.
Yeah, very anxious, very anxious. And then real quickly, the other spot that I thought was so moving was the fact that those Vietnamese children and old people on that trail, and then when the soldiers almost killed all them, because they didn't know that you don't know if they're enemy combatants, or all of a sudden you see these children and older people walking down the trail, but how do you, unless you can see them, you know there's activity. That was another thing that really jolted me. That
and probably happened a lot because you're nervous and you hear a noise, and first thing you do is start.
You just start
shooting.
You just start shooting, right?
That episode, also, the subtext of that is people handling the end of the war different ways. And the episode you're talking about, this is an ambush set up by a young lieutenant who just got there.
Right.
And he wants to be a hero. He wants to take advantage of the war while it's still there for promotion,
and
guns and glory.
That's right.
And so he was a little
too quick.
A little too quick.
Yes.
But he was saved by somebody who had been there longer and knew this couldn't end well the way that he had set it up.
That's right, exactly. Well, Winston, where can our viewers in Arlington find your book?
Well, right now it's Amazon.
Amazon is the best place?
We're getting a big tranche and convince bookstores one by one to get them. But right now, for a quick, that's the way to do it. And if you go to the site, you can actually read the first chapter online.
Okay. And thank you so much for being on the Bookman's Corner to discuss your book, Never a Good War. It was a great read, and hope to get you back with your next book.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thanks for watching. Please join us again next month for a new edition of the Bookman's Corner. I'm Lois Lindstrom.